And then the other kid was mad at me for beating him in the head with a screwdriver. But it's like, what do you expect if you break into somebody's house and jump them?
Strangers with Kittens. Gen X stories from the least parented generation.
Hi, welcome to Strangers with Kittens. Today I want to talk about siblings because it is close to National Siblings Day and I've got 5. And I've been talking to a lot of friends about their siblings and the changing relationships with siblings as you get older, and especially as parents age and pass away, and the dynamics that were sort of set up in your family when you were a kid, and how they change when parents need more care, who steps up, who doesn't, who tries to get grabby with parents' belongings, parents' money. It's a complicated thing. And I feel like there's an added layer with Gen Xers because parents weren't around as much when we were growing up. There was this added element of survival with siblings that I feel like other generations didn't have. And what does that do to sibling relationships, especially as you grow older? There was stuff that went on that didn't go on with previous generations and generations since because parents were involved and around and kids were in after school programs. And there was more supervision, more structure, more awareness. And Gen X didn't have that. Gen X had no after school programs and empty homes, just feral kids on the street. So what did that do to your sibling relationships? I think in my town, there was closeness among a lot of families of siblings, right? They might fight at home, but they would definitely have your back if you got into trouble with other kids. That was true of my brother and me. I think we fought. I mean, my brother closest in age to me, who's 3 years older, and I fist fought on the regular until we were in our 20s. I mean, I think about that. I think about the crazy fights that we would have. I mean, vicious physical fights. And there was no one around to stop it. And the thought of my kids doing that to each other is like, what? It would never happen. And I remember thinking, boy, before I had kids, like, I hope my kids don't fist fight. I don't want my kids to have that chaotic, that feeling of when's somebody going to get you in your own house. And I thought, like, I need to make a conscious effort to make sure that my household isn't like that. And then I really didn't, because when kids have structure and adult supervision, they don't behave like wild animals. You don't have to beat it out of them. It's just not even a question. So, and I know we weren't the only ones because we had neighbors across the street that used to fight really badly too. And there were just crazy rules. Like, I mean, we would fight when my parents were there. My other siblings were older and mostly out of the house, and it would have been kind of ridiculous to physically fight with them because, I mean, the next sibling was 8 years older than me, so, like, that would be ridiculous. But I do remember my older brother, the oldest brother, intervening a couple of times when my 3-year older brother would take a cheap shot, or, I mean, he was so much bigger than me anyway, but, like, we were I was scrappy, so we were pretty evenly matched, but I remember him intervening. I can count on one hand how many times that happened, but my parents would just let it go. They'd be home even, and it would just be like, "That's fine. You can fight until somebody wins," and they didn't care. You couldn't tell on the other sibling that they, like, punched you in the stomach or whatever, like, they wanna hear it. And that's whose house I'm going to for Easter, by the way. But, um but growing up Gen X, it was really different. We were more feral and therefore were more, like, physical with each other, and it was just kinda street rules in your house growing up, and maybe that wasn't everybody's house, but it was certainly mine, and it was certainly a lot of people that I knew. I mean, I remember the kid across the street running over to us to get away from his sister, who was a little bit older than him. I don't remember how much, but he came over and he had scratches, like bloody scratches down his neck that were really disturbing. Like, it really looked like a horror movie. I mean, not just like, oh, it was red. I mean, it was actually like dripping blood. And she got in a lot of trouble by her dad because it was fine if they fought, they just couldn't have visible injuries, right? Because then you go to school and it's like, what's going on at home, and then it just brings heat on the parents. So it was fine if you fought, but you didn't give each other black eyes or crazy bloody scratches on your neck because then people got involved. Um, so yeah, that was that was Gen X sibling relationships. And I really curious to know how many other people have sibling stories like that. And that it was fighting, but it was also backing each other up. Like, there was a kid who broke into our house. I use the term broke in, but we didn't have a lock or even a handle on our front door, so it was basically a swinging door. So broke in is a sort of a I'm using that term loosely. But he was mad at my brother, and so he got home before we did. Like, he got to our house before we got home from school, and then he pounced on my brother. He was hiding behind the front door, and when we came in, he jumped my brother. I was in elementary school. I think my brother might have been in 6th grade, and this kid might have been in, like, 8th and, 7th, something, and he jumped on my brother, and he was just, like, wailing on him, and I remember my brother covering his ears, just, like, curled up in the fetal position on the ground, covering his ears so his ears didn't get, like he didn't get cauliflower ear, and I ran to the kitchen and got the biggest screwdriver we had and held it by the metal side, like, the side that you would touch the screw, and there's that hard resin handle that was kind of like I feel like it was made out of the same material that phones were made out of back then. It was, like, indestructible, and I just started pounding him on the head with this handle to get him off my brother, and he was so mad, and he ran home, and then my brother was mad at me. Like, instead of heralding me as the hero that I was, he was mad at me and, like, said he could fight his own battles, which, believe me, he couldn't. Not when he got jumped unexpectedly in his own home. He was definitely not holding his own. And then the other kid was mad at me for beating him in the head with a screwdriver, but it's like, what do you expect if you break into somebody's house and jump them? So yeah, when I tell you that it was feral, I'm not kidding. There were just so many adventures, and even though my brother and I fought like cats and dogs, it was also like we were so bonded just from survival, Like, I just feel like Gen X siblings are bonded through survival, either fighting at home, getting through whatever at home, right? Because this was still the age where you got a beat down from parents. And if your sibling was, if that was happening to your sibling, you felt bad for them, right? So even though you might have been fighting, then suddenly you were like, you were on their side because they were suffering. Um, it was also because parents weren't around. Older siblings were the unwilling caretakers of younger siblings, and they were in charge and the last word, even though they were not qualified to be the authority figures. I had a friend who was 7 and was left in charge of younger siblings, 6 and 3, and the 3-year-old got hurt, and it was terrifying because there was a lot of blood, and it was like, the 6-year-old was screaming at the 7-year-old to do something, and the 7-year-old got in trouble because the baby got hurt. And it's like, I'm sorry. I am 7. Second grade. I don't know how to give stitches. I am not an adult. I mean, even adults, I've seen adults freak out in situations like that. I had a neighbor up the street who was freaking out so bad because his son fell and hit his head. And there was a lot of blood, but it wasn't a big cut. It just was very unnerving because heads and faces always bleed a lot. And so this kid came out, we were playing basketball at the top of the block, and then this kid came out, his head was gushing blood, and it was kinda seeping through his fingers, and when he took his hand away, it was really like, "Wow," and his father completely freaked out, could not help the kid, and another neighbor father stepped in and, decided that the kid did need a couple of stitches and that they got a towel and, like, pressed on it, and, so anyway, I digress. This is to say that even parents don't know how to deal with stuff like this sometimes, and yet kids were expected to and got yelled at if they didn't handle it the way, I don't know, a trained adult paramedic would. Like, it was so crazy. I mean, this father didn't get yelled at by anybody. It was a little like, "Well, that's disappointing. Your kid really needs you and you're not coming through." But nobody was yelling at them. He wasn't in trouble. Whereas when you were a kid, it was like you just got in trouble for stuff that you always felt like you were lacking because you got in trouble because you were left in an impossible situation and things went sideways as they do. So that sibling relationship was messed up because a young kid is left in charge of younger kids and stuff's going to happen. It's called neglect by the adults, but the 7-year-old feels like they're lacking and embarrassed and ashamed and guilty, which is so unfair, but that's how a lot of people felt. Growing up then with my brother and, like, with my neighbors, like, those siblings, and a lot of sibling groups that we knew, there was a lot of fighting and not wanting to spend time with each other, feeling like the other one was annoying or whatever. There was also a lot of abuse because we were all going through stuff alone, and there weren't adults around to talk to, and even if they were around, it wasn't, necessarily a safe space to be like, "Hey, I'm feeling upset or frustrated or, feelings I don't understand or know how to work through." So, kids would act out, and they would sometimes act out on their siblings, and they would be having a bad day, so they would take it out on their sibling and either beat them up or just tell them how horrible, like, and worthless they were, even sexual abuse. I mean, I know it still happens, but I suspect it may have been even more rampant in Gen X times because there weren't parents around. So, and that's something that not a lot of people talk about. I was just reading an article about it in New York Magazine not long ago. And it's a heartbreaking situation for parents because talk about Sophie's choice, it's like uh, having to choose between your kids because one is really, really abusive beyond forgiveness. Um, I think a lot of that, I mean, I have to assume a lot of that went on. We just didn't talk to each other about it and didn't know how to deal with it, kept everything inside. And yeah, we all just, we had a lot of secrets that we were all holding, just a lot that we were holding as kids. I was listening to an episode of another podcast called the Montclair Pod. I live in Montclair, New Jersey, and there's this great podcast called the Montclair Pod. And I was listening, and the hosts were talking about their high school days and whether kids were smoking weed or whether they were drinking. One of the hosts said that hers was more of a drinking school and that she had her first drink when she was a senior in high school, which actually made me laugh out loud because that was you might as well have been 30 if you were Gen X. People started drinking at like 13, 14 in Gen X times. And thinking about that now, it's like, what? But we already had a lot of trauma that we were, like, trying to numb. We were all, like just imagine us as 13 and 14-year-olds, like, sitting at the corner end of the bar, drinking our troubles away. But I remember one girl dressed for Halloween in high school like a baby. So she had on feety pajamas, and she had a bottle, a clear bottle that she was drinking out of, and it had clear liquid in it. And I guess all the teachers and everything just assumed it was water. It was vodka. She was getting plastered throughout the school day. And she might have been, I don't know, 10th grade, 11th grade, maybe. But needing to get drunk in the middle of the day on a Wednesday, like, what were you holding? And I'm laughing because that's what we learned to do. But I'm not saying it's funny. I am saying it's kind of funny the way we dealt with it. But that's why we were all drinking so young, because what else were you supposed to do? We already had like a lifetime's worth of secrets and trauma that we were all already middle-aged alcoholics at the, daytime drinkers at the town bar. That's how we dealt with it. There was no therapy back then. I mean, I guess maybe rich people started going in the 70s and 80s, but we're very, very progressive, evolved people who lived in New York, but no one else did. And certainly no kids. And I didn't know any kids who ever went to therapy, even if their parents went through a divorce or anything. Well, they lost a parent or a sibling, which did happen in my town. I don't recall ever hearing that anybody was brought to a therapist. Siblings got the brunt of whatever you were going through, and it formed very tight bonds, but there was a lot of trauma bonding, I think, back then. And there was a lot of parentifying of kids. So older kids were unwilling caregivers and resented their younger siblings, even though it wasn't their fault that they needed more care and there was no adult around. And the older ones were saddled with them. And the younger kids felt bad about being younger and needier and having needs, and also felt abandoned. So the sibling relationships in Gen X versus the sibling relationships now, I think, are very different. And I know some of it deals with socioeconomic status and education levels, and there are a lot of other things at play, but I do think that it was much more normal to have a big family with siblings taking care of other siblings and parents not around back then than it would be today. And it was perfectly fine for parents to leave all the parenting to the older kids. And how does that play out now as adults? I know a lot of people that have gone no contact with some of their siblings. A lot of trauma equals addiction, oftentimes, and causes siblings to have to go no contact, sometimes just for their own mental health, their own well-being. Caring for parents now, it's tough. When you have parents that, I don't know, say you're the older sibling. I wasn't, but say you're the older sibling and you were responsible for taking care of your younger siblings, and you had to stay home on Friday and Saturday nights because you had to watch your younger siblings, and your friends got to go out because their parents would either hire babysitters or their friends were the younger ones, or whatever the case may be. They had more freedom, and these siblings were saddled with the younger ones. There's resentment there. And then your parent is now needing parenting, basically. They've aged and they need help. They need to be taken to doctor's appointments. They need to have their homes cleaned. They need memory care, maybe. And when you're the kid who's been parentified almost your whole life, And then you finally get to an age where you're like, oh, my kids are in college or my kids are out of college or, but they're pretty self-sufficient, whatever. They're in high school, they're in college, they're out of college. And now you have to take care of the parent that not only didn't really take care of you very much, but you did their job and took care of your younger siblings. Very hard to care for that parent without resentment. And so a lot of times the older siblings are like, I'm out. I did more than my fair share. I'm out. And the younger siblings are left with it. And they're like, well, this isn't fair. I didn't have it so easy. I grew up getting beat up by my older siblings and not having parents around. And now I have to take care of the parent that, you know, wasn't really there very much, didn't really do much for me at all. So it causes all this static between siblings because it really doesn't seem fair, even though everybody has their side, right? Everyone has their reason for why they feel the way they feel, and they're all valid, but it's really unfair. And when does Gen X get out from under this? When do they get to live their lives and just be free of responsibility and not have to take care of the house and the cooking and now taking your parents to the doctor or whatever they need? And different siblings make different choices and have different boundaries around this. And then the ones that do more of the work for the aging parents, they feel resentful, and it causes siblings to not speak anymore, not spend holidays with each other. Um, really like bad blood between siblings that was really caused way back when, like in the 80s when all this happened. And I know a lot of people that, I mean, myself included, that have siblings that they don't speak to. It's due in large part to the dynamics that were set up by our parents, the dynamics that were created in our household by our parents, and the roles that we were assigned that we really had no control over, no choice, and the trauma. There's also a certain element I know with a lot of people who feel like being in touch with their sibling can make them feel like they're back in that dynamic again, and they don't want to be. They just, nothing against that sibling necessarily, but they don't want to be back in that space. They don't want to feel the way they felt in 1988, or, they've gotten an education, they've had a career, they've had children, they've had all these accomplishments. And then when they're around their siblings, they're back in this role that was created when they were children, and they can't seem to be seen for who they are now. Being a Gen X sibling came with a lot more challenges. And for everybody, I want to say that if you're in touch with your siblings and you have a healthy relationship, that's amazing. And kudos to you. If you've had to go no contact with siblings, I know how heartbreaking that is. And I see you. And I know that it's a loss and that it's sad and complicated. And it's sort of a puzzle that feels unsolvable. And my heart goes out to you. But to all Gen Xers out there who grew up feral, getting beat up by your siblings or beating up your siblings or beating up other people for your siblings, that's a big part of the sibling relationship of Gen X. And I salute you. I salute getting through. I salute being here now after you suffered all the wedgies and the noogies and the saliva hung in your face by your sibling while you're pinned down, and all the other humiliations and challenges that came with growing up Gen X with siblings. There's also funny memories, and those times where even if that was the sibling that bullied you, they had your back. I When I was in kindergarten, my brother and I were playing outside, and the teenager across the street came over and asked us if we wanted to see something cool. And like, who doesn't? So even though we were forbidden from talking to him, from going over to that house, from associating with anyone in their family because the mom was severely mentally ill, we couldn't resist the possibility of seeing something cool. So we dusted off the seats of our pants and we walked across the street to this kid's house and down into his garage. It was like below ground. You had to walk down this steep driveway. And then he shut the garage door behind us, and it was pitch black because we had just been in the bright sun. And then I felt cold liquid being splashed on me, and my nose stung because he was pouring gasoline on us. And then we heard the hiss of a match, and he started taunting us and like lunging at us with this lit match. And I was young. I knew it wasn't a great situation, but I didn't really understand the gravity of it, but my brother did. And he actually put his hand in front of me, put his arm in front of me and kind of put me behind him and told the kid to stop, and he wouldn't. And he just kept lighting match after match. And then he was like taunting us, and the match burned his finger and he got distracted. He dropped it and got disoriented and gave my brother the opportunity to pull the garage door open, and it was stuck. It would only open about 12 inches, and so we had to roll underneath the garage door, and we both dropped to the floor, the dirty, oily cement garage floor, and rolled underneath the garage door and out onto the driveway, and then ran to our backyard, soaked in gasoline. And then my brother, once we caught our breath and made sure that this kid wasn't following us, we were hiding behind our shed in the backyard, and my brother told me to take my clothes off and put them in the garbage can, and he did the same. And all this was happening, by the way, while my mother was in the house with a realtor and a couple trying to secretly sell the house out from under my father because she hated our house. But there was no for sale sign on the front lawn because my father didn't want to sell the house. And so now we're crouched outside in the backyard naked with a realtor and a couple in the house looking at the house. We snuck inside after, as my mother was showing them out, and we crouched in the backyard until they left, and then we went upstairs and my brother emptied like an entire bottle of strawberry shampoo on the both of us to get rid of the gasoline smell, and we never told our parents. So that is the day that my brother, who used to give me noogies and wedgies and fight with me multiple times a day, that was the day that he saved my life. So happy Siblings Day to everyone. Whether you're in touch with your siblings, you had to go no contact with your siblings, you've lost a sibling, I see you too, and I know how that feels. I hope that you have a few good memories that you can reflect on, and if you don't, I applaud you for being strong and still being here. Thanks for listening.